Google Analytics, a tool that many people install on their website who unknowingly end up contributing to the growth of Google's surveillance empire as they continue to monitor the behavior of every human on the web. Jokes aside, Google Analytics is a very powerful tool to helping product owners and developers understand the behavior of users on their websites, as well as creating and analyzing those funnels. As a Laravel developer, you've probably heard of a package called Laravel Analytics, yet another open source tool made by the geniuses over at Spady. If you have used this tool like we have, you may have run into a roadblock as it only supports server-side events, which is okay for 80% of the use cases. However, for the people that need GA on the client side of your Laravel app, you're sort of left to fend for yourself. Today, I will show you how to easily integrate Google Analytics 4 while using Laravel and React with InertiaJS. We will be showing a practical example such as an FAQ dropdown where we will log each FAQ item the user selects, which we can then see within the Google Analytics dashboard. This might be useful for product owners to understand what questions their users click on the most. Before we begin, I expect you to 1. Have a Google Analytics account, 2. Have a basic understanding of InertiaJS, React, Tailwind CSS, and Laravel. 3. Know how to set up Inertia and React within a Laravel app. If you don't, you can check this video out. Now, let's get started. First things first, we want to head over to the Google Analytics dashboard, copy the measurement ID, then paste it into our env as the following value. Then in our terminal, we will want to install the React GA4 package by using npm install react-ga4. Once installed, we'll want to create a file called analytics context within a new context directory. The analytics context will serve as a way to globally define our Google Analytics implementation as it will be wrapped around our main app component. Within the file, first we want to create a constant called analytics provider, which will be of a type functional component. Then we want to create a local type called props, which will take in a property called session ID, which will be a string. This will be using the Laravel session ID as our unique identifier for Google Analytics. Note, we will set this value later within the handles inertia request middleware. Then we want to pass our newly created props type to the functional component as a generic, where we want to grab the default children and the session ID, which will be used later. Then we want to import the React GA4 from React GA4. After that, we want to import the create context and use effect hooks from React. Next, we will create the analytics context variable and pass in null as the default value. Then, within the analytics provider component, we will pass in the use effect hook and set the dependency array to be empty, as it will only run once. Then, within the use effect hook, we will initialize the React GA4 package by passing in the measurement ID from our env as the first argument. Then, within our options, we'll want to set the user ID to equal the session ID from our props. Due to the user privacy concerns, Google prohibits using email addresses or names to the user identity, as the ID shouldn't be personally identifiable information. Now, within our JSX, we'll want to use the analytics context and pass in null for the default value, then pass down the children. As mentioned before, we want to make the analytics provider global, so we will need to wrap the main app component, which we can do by first importing the analytics provider. Then, within our setup method, we will want to grab the initial page props so that we can pass the session ID. Once initialized, we can then wrap the app component with our provider and inject the session ID as a prop. Next, we need to share the session ID from our backend to the React app, which we can do by going to the handle inertia request middleware, which will serve as the glue between the backend and frontend code. All we have to do is create the session ID property within the array and grab the session ID from the request object. Now, to test this is working properly, let's head to our terminal and start the servers. First, we can run npm run dev to start the Vite frontend server, then run php artisan serve to start the backend server. Now, within our app tsx file, we can console log our session ID. And if we go to the browser, we can see the session ID is being logged correctly. Now let's create a file called events.ts, which is where the various client-side events will live. First, we want to import the React GA4, which will be used below. Next, let's create a type called tracked event, which will have a name property as a string and a params property as an object. Now we want to create a function called track, which will take in a parameter called EV, which will be of type tracked event. Using React GA, we'll want to call the event method, which will take in a name and params for its arguments. Then, for dev purposes, we'll console log the tracked event. Note, the track method will serve as our abstract tracking method, so if you want to add more analytics providers like Facebook Pixel or Hotjar, you could add them within this method. Now, let's create a custom event called track FAQ toggle that takes in a question as a parameter for when a user toggles an FAQ item. Note, Google has a list of recommended events and the JSON structure they require. For our event, we will use the recommended select content event, which will require a content type, which will be set to FAQ, and content ID, which will be set to the value of our question. After creating the tracked event object, we can now track it using our abstract track method. Now, let's bind our track FAQ toggle function to when a user opens an FAQ item. We can start by heading over to the welcome page, where you can see I've replaced the default content with an FAQ page from a component library called Cometa. Within the welcome component, you can see a variable holding a list of FAQs, where we then loop through each item which is passed to the FAQ item component. This FAQ item component takes in a title and description prop. It also has a state variable for tracking the open state. To bind our track FAQ toggle function, we can create a function called handle FAQ click within the FAQ item component. We can start by checking if isOpen is not true, as that signifies the user is opening the FAQ accordion, where we'll then want to track the event by passing in the title for the parameter. Then below we can set the state variable to the opposite of its current value. Now let's bind the handle FAQ click to the onClick event handler on the button. Now let's test this out in the browser by clicking a single FAQ item, where we can then see the console log is working properly. And if we head over to the Google Analytics dashboard, we can see that the event has been successfully tracked within the past 30 minutes.